All right. Awesome. And with that automated message, this is official. So hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm looking forward to talking with you all today. And in a moment here, you should see a slide, how innovative schools are addressing social media, current events, and tech. And so this is what we'll be talking with you about today. My name is Lauren. I work with a lot of schools in Illinois. Before I joined the Social Institute, I actually come from the land of higher ed. So I was a coach and a teacher for about 11 years. And I always felt like I was seeing a lot of the trends and times change with the students that I was coaching, and the students I was recruiting from high school, things changing around social media and the ways that schools manage this. So I'm excited to talk with you all today. And what I'm going to do here is send out a poll. I know we did some quick where we're from in the chat, but I'll send out this poll. I'd love to hear more from you on your role and a few other questions there. So you should be able to see that now. We'll leave that up for just a moment here. I'll give it about 30 seconds. So take a minute, make that response, and we'll share who we're seeing here. I'm seeing some principals, assistant principals, some teachers, some middle school and high school so far, some elementary. All right. All right, and then our question there, number 3, how many hours each day do students ages 13 to 18 spend with entertainment screen media? And 100% so far are on the same page right now. I won't reveal what that is for another few seconds here.
Yeah, make sure to scroll down in the poll. There are 3 questions there, all grouped together. We were curious how this would work with kind of one poll, but multiple questions. And it looks like you just may need to scroll down to answer questions 2 and 3.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. All right, I'll leave it for 15 more seconds and then I'll end the poll. So far, it looks like we have a lot of teachers in the room, so that's very exciting. We have some assistant principals, heads of school, and then a pretty even split, elementary, middle, and high school. And then now that we're at our last 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds here. All right, I want to share it's a 50-50 split consensus on the group on 8.3 hours or 9.5 hours that students are spending on the screens. And I'll end the poll there, and I will let you know that it actually is that 9.5 hours. So we know that students spend about close to 9 hours a day on social media and tech and screens for entertainment outside of school every day. And so it already brings us into some of the things that we want to talk about our screen management. But what I'll do now is we'll get into what we are, sorry, that poll just popped right back up on me. We're going to talk about our agenda for the day. So we're going to kick things off here with a game. We'll talk about the role that social media and tech is playing with our students. We'll talk about what schools have been doing in this space that maybe isn't as effective as it could be. And then we'll conclude with some best practices for you to take away and implement into your schools. And so like I mentioned, though, I come from the land of higher ed as a coach, so we are going to get competitive here, and we are going to start with a quick game. And this is going to be a concentration challenge. So in a moment, when I click onto the next screen, we're going to participate in an activity, but I want to set the stage first. So I want you to think back to the version of you that is 12, 13, 14, and you are about to do your homework. Think about the headspace you would be in at that age, where you used to do it. Maybe it was in, the dining room before dinner, maybe in the cafeteria after school before a sport practice, maybe on the bus to a club or activity. Where did you do your homework? What did that feel like? Really sit in those sights and sounds right now. And then what we're going to do here with that frame of mind, when I hit to the next screen, you'll have 60 seconds. You'll see a grid on the screen. And what you're going to do is try to find in numerical order the numbers 1 to 100. So you'll see a grid with numbers all over the place. I'll time you for a minute, and your task is just to count up from 1 and get as far as you can. All right. If there are any questions, toss them in the chat. I'll give that just a moment here. And then I'm not seeing anything pop up. So I'm going to hit next. I'll have my timer ready to go for 60 seconds. And we'll go in 3, 2, 1. So 60 seconds starts now. Finding 1 to 100. About 20 seconds. 5. And that's time. So stop your counting in the chat. You can send in what number did you get to? All right, 19. All right, 14, 18. All right, all right. We're all pretty much in the teens here. So not bad, not bad. Now we're gonna do this activity one more time. So you have the numbers. All right, see an 18 coming through. All right, so you have the number that you got to in 60 seconds. Now we want to put ourselves into present day. So what is the environment that our students are in when they're doing their homework now? That's what we're going to mimic for you with all of the different tech and distractions that they might be experiencing. So in a moment, like I said, we'll do the same activity again, but I'm going to do my very best to replicate what the modern environment for our students might be. So get ready. We'll have a new board. Ready.
Ready, set, go.
And that is your time. So just like before, toss it in the chat. How did you do that time? And all right, I already see we have a 9. And feel free to throw in there too, if you have one word to describe how that felt, throw that in there too. If I was going to type in, mine is always frustrated, overwhelming, right? Terrible, anxious. Yeah. Yeah, it feels not so bad. Yep, holy cow. It feels not so bad at the start when things just start changing color a little. It does stress me a little bit, but then when the notifications and then the board starts to get covered, no matter how many times I do this myself, I start to get upset at that change. So what's interesting though is that for us, for educators, for our admin, what you're all describing and that reduced number is really common. What we find when we run this with students is they actually do significantly better than the adults. So we find that they'll do about 15 numbers better than what we all just reported. And part of that is because this is the environment that they've grown up in. This is what they're acclimated to. That's not to say that this type of environment is leading to the best outcome, but it does mean that there is a little bit of a difference in the way that students view this space. So what we want to do next is think about what is the current state of affairs with social media and tech and well-being. And so we're going to do a little bit more of a game here, a little fact or fiction. So again, I'm going to ask you to keep those chats open and we'll go through a few different questions here and get your take. So the first one, we'll have fact or fiction. 81% of teachers agree that an emphasis on student well-being has a positive effect on engagement in their classrooms. Is that fact or fiction? You can throw that in the chat. Yep, have a few facts coming in here. And you are correct. That is fact. So it's pretty near unanimous here that student well-being has a positive effect on engagement in the classroom, right? And so finding different ways to infuse that can really help whatever the subject matter is that you're teaching otherwise. All right, next one. Question is, round two, 95% of teens regularly use a smartphone. Is that fact or fiction? Yep, seeing more facts pop through. No surprise here. You're right on that one. All right, this next one might be a little trickier. The question here, final question for fact or fiction. As of March 2021, 50% of district leaders said they were providing a device for every middle school and high school student. Is that a fact or fiction? And this one can be a little tricky. All right, we're getting some mixed responses. Yep, and it is fiction. And the reason for that is because it's actually much higher. It's 90%. So 90% of district leaders as of March 2021 were providing a device for every single middle and high school student. And so what we can already see here is that we know wellness is really important to student engagement in the classroom and their ability to learn. We also know that most of our middle and high school students have smartphones, are using them, and we know that these are really effective tools that we're providing to our students, the one-to-one devices in the classroom, right? And so there's already a little bit of groundwork environment here. What we also know is that there are a lot of challenges in this space. So just as much as smartphones and devices and social media can be really effective tools, and it's the environment that our students have grown up in, there are also a lot of challenges that our students are experiencing in this space. And so what we do here at the Social Institute, we talk to schools every day about what they're seeing in this space. And so when we see the challenges that are growing in schools and we're talking to our school colleagues, here's what we're hearing about. We're hearing about a lack of inclusion and belonging when students feel like they're getting kicked out of those group chats, right? We're hearing about a lack of student voice if students don't feel like they're a part of this education. I want to stop and just throw in the chat if there's an area, a challenge on this screen that as you're looking at it is really jumping out at you that you are seeing number one in your school right now in this space. Oh yes, and Savannah, thank you for that reminder. Toss that blue box on the chat. If you put that to everyone instead of hosts and panelists, then the whole group will see. If you're not comfortable doing that, I'm happy to call out what I'm seeing that's being directed to hosts and panelists as well. But yeah, I'm seeing two people have responded with distracted so far. That we hear quite a bit, right? It's even if you're a school that has limited the use of phones in school, so much happens outside of the school day. And then the students are still bringing that to the classroom and are distracted about what that is and what went on. We also added student absenteeism in here recently. We've been hearing more and more about that from our schools that we work with around the country. And there's a number of reasons for student absenteeism, but when you think about the challenges that have to do with social media and technology, it used to be the case that when you went home from school, school stayed at school, right? And when you went to school, home stayed at home. Now, the way that we're connected, everything can follow you everywhere. And so that certainly can make it more challenging if students are experiencing difficulty in this space. And so when we think about these challenges, we think about, again, the fact that when students aren't healthy, they can't learn as well. And we categorize these into three different areas to address. So we think about relationships and connection. Again, that can be anything from the students interacting with each other, the cyberbullying they might experience, that distraction that comes with that. It can also be how families are unaligned on tech policies, whether that be across the family communities or with the school, and how that affects the relationships and ability to connect. We also think about self-awareness and self-management. So here we're thinking about privacy concerns, right? Not only what are your students sharing themselves, but what are people sharing of them with or without their consent? We know that before students enter kindergarten, I believe the recent stat we have is that on average, students have about 3,000 photos shared of them before they enter kindergarten. And that's obviously being shared by family and friends. And thinking about privacy, those students aren't giving consent to have those things shared, right? And so it can be, again, this full community issue. And then the academics and engagement, if the students are distracted, if they're feeling all of these different issues going on, the lower grades can come with that, lower classroom engagement. And so we also know this takes a broader toll on the community. Your educators, we hear more and more that teachers are feeling burnt out. We know that counselors feel like they're playing whack-a-mole. They don't have as much time to get in front of issues. They are often chasing what has already happened. Families also feel like they're not keeping up. By the time they know about what's the new trend, their students are rolling their eyes at them because they're behind the times on whatever that trend is. And they're seeing it as the school's responsibility to educate. And then the last piece here that you'll see is that students have a hard time with this because they feel like the content that they're being shared isn't relevant. And so part of this is thinking about how are we addressing this full community. And the challenge is everywhere. Again, I'm sure you won't be surprised by the stats on this screen, but we know 90% of teachers say that burnout is a serious problem. Families are really concerned that their students are addicted to tech and screens. And we know that teens also self-identify that anxiety and depression is a problem among their generation. And so the problems that we see, nobody is unaware of them. And what we want to think about here are what are the approaches that we've taken so far to address them. So first, when we're talking to schools, what I'll share here in a moment are a few ineffective approaches that I think we've probably all done, but just don't make as big of an impact as we're expecting them to. And so the first one here, it's an ineffective approach, is when schools don't empower their entire community through a common language and consistent approach. So like we were just talking about, every constituent in your community feels the impact of these challenges in this space. And when a school only addresses, let's say, like a parent presentation, right? Well, the students aren't caught up. The teachers and educators might not be on the same page. And so now we only have one prong of the community that is about to take action, and they don't have that support from everybody else. Another one here, when schools approach character education in a one-dimensional way. Again, we know that our students, they live complicated, they're in complicated worlds, right? They are in these different clubs and activities. They communicate in a lot of different ways. They have a lot of different pressures on them. And so character education really needs to address that full scope, but often a lot of the character education that we see only addresses one part of the student experience. Another thing that we can think about is when adults only lecture students, right? We know that students feel like the subject matter expert in this space. And so when they feel like they're being lectured to, instead of having a conversation and learning together, what we find is that students just take those phones elsewhere, right? They have a phone that they'll put into a slot when they have to hand it in at the beginning of the day, but they might have a second one in their pocket that they're interacting with because they're not really understanding the why behind a lot of the education. And then another here, when schools rely on one and done efforts. Here, we think a lot about those assemblies. When I think back to my time in K through 12, I can only truly remember one assembly that I ever went to. I was in third grade. It was about the library. And I think the only reason I remember it is because the person that was speaking to us was playing the guitar, and he sang us a song. And I won't sing it for you, but the line that I remember, it's more like a song stuck in my head, is you don't have to pay, you can stay all day at the library. And so that is the assembly that stuck with me the longest. But what that tells you is that most of the time there's excitement beforehand, there's excitement after. If there's not somebody playing a song along to have that stuck in your head into your 30s, then a lot of times this effort with the one and done presentations fades away pretty quickly. And I'm sure we've all experienced those. And then the last one here is when schools use outdated and out of touch character education content and students roll their eyes. Again, this is such a fast moving space. I'm sure everybody here feels that, especially now that there's more and more going on with AI and the way that students are using that. Every day there's something new, a new app, a new tool, a new way for students to communicate and use these different pieces. And this content needs to stay up to date so that the students feel like it's actually relevant and that they're understood. Which brings us to our best practices, right? So we know what we've been trying, we know what hasn't quite been hitting the mark and having the impact that we want. So what I want to do now is start to think about our best practices and what we can take moving forward. So we want to think about proven effective approaches. So instead of thinking about things like digital citizenship or digital wellness, we want to try to transition this conversation into more of life skills for the modern day. So we actually had a student tell us recently, like, what is digital? That was the question that we were asked, because students don't see digital as a separate piece, right? When I was growing up, my first social media account was AOL Instant Messenger, and you had to sit down at the computer, log in, and as soon as you got online, your mom took a phone call and you got booted, right? And so there really was a digital world and then the rest of the world. And now students don't see a difference, right? And so we want to think of it as life skills for the modern day to really address their true lived experience. You also want to take a proactive approach, right? So instead of being reactive and responding once the things have already happened, how can we help students get ahead of this? So that's something we want to think about with our programming and our approach as well. And then empowering and equipping students, right? Again, coming up as an athlete, a lot of my coaches said, don't post, don't take a picture, don't, right? And that didn't make my teammates not do that. It just made them be really, really secretive about how they behaved with their social media environment. When you can empower and equip students to make good choices online and acknowledge that this is an important way that they communicate. I'm sure many of you, your sports teams or clubs have Instagrams or different social media presence to alert to changes of meetings or to hype up for game day, right? If we can acknowledge that that's how students communicate with each other, we can empower them to communicate really well and to make really good practices. And then another piece on this screen that is also really important as you're thinking about this approach that you'll take with your schools is keeping student voice at the forefront and engaging your students in that peer-to-peer conversation. Again, when we think about lecturing to students about social media and technology, they tune out pretty quickly. But when they get the opportunity to actually engage with one another and engage with you as their instructors and their admin teams and feel understood, they are so willing to connect and to explain and to learn. So as we have that framework, we had our ineffective approach where schools weren't empowering their entire community through that common language. We want to think about empowering students, educators, and families through a common strategy, unifying language, and tailored resources. So as you're thinking about this, I want you to take a moment. You don't have to put this one in the chat, but think about the language that you're already using in your school, because you probably have some. And think about how that could be branched out into, if it's something, an initiative with your students, how can you branch that into work with your families or work with your instructors? And think about different ways that you can expand that to meet this full community. You can see here that this can really flow nicely if your leadership is all on the same page, your faculty understand the goal of the programming, and they have really strong facilitation skills. Your students then are building these modern skills. They're influencing each other, right? And then we're taking these conversations home to the families and getting them on the same page as well. I had a principal tell me last week that Monday is their least favorite day, not for the traditional reasons anymore, but because Monday morning is when they get the phone calls about everything that happened on the weekend. And the rest of the week is just playing damage control on what happened on TikTok and Snapchat from Saturday and Sunday before. And if we can get the families, right, all the way from leadership down to families on the same page on this work, those phone calls are minimized because families have more of a framework on how to actually have this conversation. And when I mentioned thinking about language that you already have in your community, I want you to think about that as we go through these social standards here. Here at the Social Institute, when we're thinking about how do we empower communities, this is really the core of our work. So we think about talking to students, educators, and families about these 7 different social standards. And we address playing to your core, right? Thinking about how your students are reflecting their values in everything that they do. So online, offline, in the classroom, with their teammates, wherever that might be. Protecting your privacy like you're famous. That one is exactly what it sounds like. Are you in control of your personal information? Do our students have a strong understanding of the settings on different apps and devices? Do they know who's sharing what about them? And are they asking for consent when they're sharing things about others? Another thing that I heard recently from a teacher was I was speaking to a teacher who didn't realize that a student had taken her picture in the middle of class, and this was a fourth grade classroom, and she went through her whole day, and at the end of the day another student came in and told her that they'd seen this picture and it wasn't very flattering, and she didn't realize that every student that had come in and out of that classroom all day had seen this picture that she didn't even know had existed, right? And so understanding the impact of consent both ways on protecting your privacy. Striking a balance, we can think about how we're educating students on balancing that time and attention. I know we talked about that, managing how much time students are on devices for entertainment every day. This is where we can really think about how are we using our school language to have this standard of balance and engaging with the world around us. Cyberback, that's actually a term that was coined by a student, and it is meant to be the opposite of cyberbully. So how do your students have one another's back and support each other online and off? How are your students finding the influencers, right? Who are they following? Are they positive influences? This can also be understanding who different accounts are that they follow. I shared with a colleague the other day, I had sent a meme to a friend of mine that was suggested to me on Instagram, and after I sent it, I decided to take a look at the account of the meme that I had just sent, and I realized it was not in alignment with what I typically follow. And so being mindful of like, who are you following? What does that mean? What is that doing for you? Using your mic for good, right? How are you that good influence in your school community? And then handling the pressure. And so that's finding your own path, no matter the pressure from others. We know students feel like they have to keep up with the latest trends on TikTok. They feel like they need to have the latest video game so they can get on Discord, even just have the latest piece of technology. I know the new iPhone just came out the other day, and that a student comes into school with the new iPhone, and then now there's a disparity on who has what, right? And so as we're thinking about addressing the full community and getting that common language, this is our language that we use here at the Social Institute. This can be really helpful as a framework to map some of your own school language onto as well. As I move on to the next one, we talked about schools approaching character education in a one-dimensional way. We want to take a more effective approach here. The alternative is to lean into the many dimensions of character education and integrate them throughout the student experience. And so thinking a little bit more about this one, when we think about how we're talking with students at the Social Institute, this here is really our North Star. So then I'm sure in much of what you're doing in the school, you're addressing these pieces. And the idea is thinking about how do we integrate this all into that one framework, right? So we think about that college and career prep and emotional intelligence, right? As a former college coach, and I think about college and career prep, I think about how students share things on social media and understanding the impact of what's shared and how their accounts are set up. And one role that I had when I was recruiting student athletes was making sure that there wasn't anything on a student's public-facing account that wasn't in alignment with our school or with our team. And so helping students to understand how to set themselves up for success, and also the implications of people that are actually looking at these different materials, right? We also think about our role models, our character development, diversity, equity, inclusion, current events, leadership development, all of these things that go into helping our students to win at social and make really good, strong, high character choices. We also want to think about this feedback loop. So when you're thinking about the approach you're taking with your school, and we're all taking that full community approach now, we're allowing our students to feel heard, and we are now better understanding our students because they're more willing to respond, right? So when they're better equipped, they feel understood. Now you can equip them even better, and you can see how this flywheel can really, really take off and impact a stronger school culture. Another piece here, we have an ineffective approach that adults lecture students. The alternative, the effective approach to think about is elevating student voice, sharing a variety of perspectives, and helping students positively influence each other through peer-to-peer discussion. Again, we know that students are on the front lines. They're who is marketed to with much of this as well. So elevating that voice and letting them share their experience helps us as the educators working with the students to guide them in this education. You can think about how this can scale with the students as well. So we know 3rd through 5th, while I am hearing that more and more students are receiving smartphones, smartwatches, getting access to social media accounts, we also know that not all 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders have access to that, right? So here you might think about building more emotional awareness, those social skills, helping them to understand what happens when they incidentally scroll onto something. A lot of what I hear is about families that will hand a third grader a TikTok, on a phone when they're in the grocery store line, just trying to get through the end of that shopping trip. They'll hand the student that phone. Now the student is stumbling on things they might not have been exposed to, and equipping them, for example, on how to navigate that. In grades 6 through 8, now this is where I hear is the real sweet spot of students really getting those devices and starting to get themselves into some trouble, and they need a lot of help. And so this is where you can think about helping students with daily challenges like changing social media and technology experiences. We know there's a lot of change to friend groups in this age. So what happens, with those group chats when you add people in or you kick people out, or there's a group chat you didn't even know about. And then what happens if you're that student that doesn't even have that device, or doesn't have access to a certain app because of how their family operates with phone and tech policy. And so you can think about educating your students on those situations. And then grades 9 through 12, we're thinking about strengthening student resilience, those soft skills, emotional intelligence, and again, planning for the future. So understanding the impact, how to set yourself up in a really positive way. I had a school that shared that they helped their juniors and seniors build LinkedIn profiles, which again, not a very fun social media platform for students when you first pitch it to them. But then once they see it as an opportunity to highlight their accomplishments and put that out there as a public facing platform for potential coaches, college admissions, employers, right? Then students start to see how they can be really mindful with how they engage with social media as they move through the later years of high school. Another ineffective approach we discussed was schools relying on one and done efforts. So this is where we can think about organizing sustainable and developmentally relevant approaches to character education that grow with students. And so this is where we want to think about mapping it out, not just that one assembly or that one speaker. You want to think about mapping out this programming for your students from September all the way through June, and how that might look. Here we have at the Social Institute, we have our own worldwide calendar of our suggested approach, and that includes hitting each of those social standards. So again, you could think about those social standards. You could also think about the different values and frameworks that you have at your school, but mapping them across the different grades, across different classes, and across the different months of the year. And then here we have our ineffective approach that schools use outdated and out of touch character education content and students roll their eyes. The effective alternative to this is meeting students where they are by addressing the modern ways students are social. And so here we'll share some top devices that 3rd through 5th graders, 6th through 8th graders, and 9th through 12th graders use weekly. So in the chat here, I wanna ask you, what do you think are the top devices for those different ages? So you see the options here. Give your best guess for each cohort. So 3rd through 5th, 6th through 8th, and 9th through 12th. What do you think are the top devices that those students are using weekly? And I'll leave the chat there for a minute for you to put in your guesses. All right, we have a vote for 3rd grade. It's the tablet. Another person, personal tablet, smartphone. I'm going to assume that's in order. So 6 through 8 would be smartphone, 9 through 12 would be gaming device. I'll leave it open for another moment here. Yep, sixth we have gaming. All right, tablet, gaming, smartphone. 9th, smartphone. Yeah, so it seems like we're somewhat on the same page. There might be a little debate on where gaming fits in. So we surveyed nearly 30,000 students, and I'm about to share with you the results of that polling. So you can see here the top devices for 3rd through 5th. We had TV at the top. When we think about TV, we're not thinking about like necessarily like the old school, what we all grew up with. We're thinking about all of the ways that students are streaming also. So how much time they're spending watching streaming. And then with 3rd through 5th, it's that school issued tech and then the personal tablet, some gaming, and video activated assistant. 6th through 8th, we can see again that school issued tech and smartphone really take the lead. TV and gaming a little bit lower. And it might be surprising, especially given what we had in the chat here, that gaming is actually not at the top in that way, but smartphone does work its way up by 9th through 12th grade. And then we can see that school issued tech is a really big component here. But gaming does show up on all three of these. And so as students are getting more and more exposed to technology, we know that it's really important that we pair that with education around these devices. And especially given that school issued tech is actually top 2 for all 3 of these, right? That can be a really great opportunity and segue into this education because we're already providing them that tool and framing it as a tool. The next thing that I'll share here, and we'll think about this again. What are the top apps that 3rd through 5th graders, 6th through 8th graders, and 9th through 12th graders use weekly? So again, take to the chat and toss in your guesses here. Top apps for each of those cohorts. And we have quite a few on here for you to choose from. All right, we have our first guess in here: Snapchat, TikTok, Discord. Video streaming, Snapchat, TikTok. Snapchat and no idea. That's totally fair. All right, so I'll leave it up for another moment here, and I will also tell you that you're going to be surprised by a little bit of this when I hit the next screen here. All right, we have a guess for TikTok, Snapchat, and TikTok. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hit to the next slide. And what you're gonna see here, when we polled students, 83% of middle schoolers said they're using YouTube on a weekly basis, followed by that FaceTime. We do have email on here. It is social. And I think the thing that I typically hear about that is that it feels like students don't know that email exists because they don't respond to them. And so while that may feel true, it's not that this is their most preferred app, but email is something for 9 through 12 that they find themselves on a lot, right? So that's something that they're on the most consistently. And again, whether they respond or not is a whole nother story. And maybe that can be a part of the education around your students is good email etiquette. But that's one that is always a big surprise to people. But if you look at 3rd and 5th, right, we can see YouTube is at the top, just like it is with 6th through 8th. It's still pretty close for our high school students. FaceTime is more prominent for 3rd and 5th and 6th through 8th, and it really drops off for 9 through 12th. And then you can see some of those. I won't read all of these to you, but you can see how some of this changes. And we thought a lot about gaming in the last question. You can see where that pops up here as well. So 3rd and 5th, they are doing some mobile gaming. 6th through 8th, they're doing more console gaming, but that is not near the top as far as our 9 through 12th. So you can see here that this really changes as our students age. And so this can be really helpful to be aware of and to think about what those go-to apps and platforms are, what's going to be really relevant to your students, and again, how are they engaging with one another. And so we also ask students their go-to app and platform. And again, you can see the rank order here for 3rd through 5th, their go-to YouTube, Roblox, and gaming. For 6th through 8th, their go-to YouTube, TikTok, texting, and then 9 through 12, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. And so that's where some of our predictions from 2 screens ago really start to align, right? When it's where the students get to have that preference. So what I want to do is open up the chat if there's any questions that we can answer. I know we're a little ahead on time, so I'm happy to open up that chat. And that's totally okay if there's none in the chat right now. I do also want to just share here our another poll. So do you see another poll here? It's just going to ask a little bit about what you saw today, about the different challenges that you saw, different social standards. So I'll put that up there. And then also while that poll is up, I'll also come to this slide here. You can scan this to fill out a survey. This will be, if you wouldn't mind filling this out, this is an opportunity for me to get some feedback from you as well. I'm always interested in upping my webinar game. So would definitely appreciate if you gave that QR code a quick scan so that we could get that feedback. So I'll leave that up in a moment, and then I'll have another one for you to check out another resource. Okay, I'm seeing some questions here. So what are some of the ways to actually get parents engaged with this topic? Yeah, that's a great question, Andrea. So a few different pieces. So as we're thinking about the different the language that you're using in your community, when you're mapping out your framework of what you want to hit with this education, with the modern life skills, anything that you're doing with your students, you want to think about looping the families in as well, right? So if you're giving education in this space, if you have a pre-existing newsletter that you send out, if your counseling department has something like that, I know that's something we hear about quite a bit, it can be really helpful to send a quick summary of like what these topics are that you're talking about home, and that gives your students an opportunity to engage with the families about these topics. We also on our end here, and thank you for filling out this poll. I'll end the poll now. And as I move over here, I'm going to leave this QR code up for a moment. This is going to give you some insights into what your students are experiencing. This is our 2024 Student Insights Report. So you can grab this report from us. This can be something that's really helpful to give you some insight into your students' most used apps, devices, how they feel about these different topics. And again, thinking about how you're engaging with your families on this. In a moment here, I'll switch to another screen. This is going to be, and Savannah just dropped that into the chat as well. But keeping your families up to date on the different trends can be really helpful to keep them engaged. And so Savannah has that link to the insights report in the chat. I'll add this up here now, the huddle. So this can be really helpful that you can take away right now and bring this to your families. This is our newsletter. Again, so much happens so fast in this space. What we do with the huddle is keep you and your families up to date on the trends that the students are experiencing. So I don't know if last holiday season, any of you noticed that a lot of students were asking for skincare products for the holidays. That caught a lot of families off guard because on the different social media apps, students were actually being fed through their algorithm like beauty products. And we started seeing younger and younger students, and specifically younger and younger female students, asking for this. And that was a trend that was coming from different apps. Another one that was a little bit scarier, last summer, you may have been familiar with the borax trend. And so on TikTok, and to their credit, they did take it down very quickly, but there was an influencer trend where young students were being encouraged to mix borax and water and drink it as a cleanse. And that's really scary, and it had some bad outcomes. And again, TikTok brought it down really quickly, but for those of us that are not, in the target age range, we weren't seeing that on our algorithm feeds, right? And so this is really important to help you stay up to date on what's going on in this space so that you can communicate that home. So again, the huddle is a really helpful tool when you're thinking about talking to the families. You want to think about keeping them up to date on trends. You want to think about whatever it is that you're doing with the students, communicating that out to the families as well. So now, again, if you get that Monday phone call, you are able to reference back to the work that you're doing and give the families those tools that you're providing to the students to reinforce that work at home. I have only choose one on here. Was that that might have been in reference to one of the challenges? Which challenge would be the toughest? But any other questions that are popping up, and Savannah shared as well, there will also be some free resources available on the huddle. We have what we call platform playbooks at the Social Institute. And so we have a couple of those available that you'll be able to see through that huddle as well. Again, thinking about educating families on what these different apps are, things to look out for, strong settings to advise, things, if there's something impacting your community, including that in that outreach to families as well. But the key is the consistency there. And then one other piece, as we're thinking about questions, and Savannah just shared the Snapchat playbook, so please feel free to download that. That playbook, you're going to have the opportunity to see what the app is. I'm sure we're all very familiar with it at this point, but what the app is, how the students can use it well, because again, we want to think about what are the ways that we can empower the good use, right? We know students will use these apps and devices. How do we encourage that good use? It'll also include ways that students have gotten in trouble. Something that you can especially alert to on Snapchat is features to be aware of. One of them on there that has created, I think, a significant number of stalking cases with the K through 12 students is the Snap Map. A lot of families don't realize that sometimes their students don't have their location settings locked in. And so when they go to share pictures of themselves, their location is popping up on a public map. And so people know like where they are in real time always. So that can be really important for families to be aware of as they talk to and monitor their students and advise different settings to have on that phone. Another key thing for families to be aware of on Snapchat is the Snap Streak. I was on a flight recently and I heard a group of students actually that was on a no-tech trip, and they were really excited about it until they sat down on the plane. And then I started to hear some whispering in the seats behind me. And the one student said to another that she really hoped that her mom understood how to use Snapchat when she explained it, because she really didn't want to lose her Snap Streak. And so, right, these different pressures where we know that our students feel like they need to engage, and there's a lot of social capital that comes along with that. And so you'll see all that in that Snapchat playbook. Again, we're talking about social media. The screen that I have on here is to follow us on social media. So if you're on social media yourself, we're on all of these different spaces. So give us a follow. We put out resources, webinars all the time that are also really helpful as you're thinking about linking your full community in. A lot of those resources you can share out and invite your families to. So we try to make this as accessible as possible. And then that is the presentation that we have. So I will unshare my screen here. If there's any final questions, I'll hang out and I'm happy to answer. But otherwise, I want to thank everybody for attending today. I really appreciated the engagement and the conversation. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us as well. We're always looking for ways to help support your school communities.
Awesome, Lauren, thank you so much. We really appreciated this presentation. So many great strategies and tips for us on how to navigate these modern technologies as educators. So that was fantastic. I love all the resources you shared at the end as well. A lot of thank yous coming into the chat. Savannah's got a link for you there to the Social Institute website, so you can get there and get to the resources that were discussed. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.